I was just a shy waitress, unnoticed and quiet, until I greeted the billionaire CEO's mother in perfect sign language. But what I didn't know was that this family hid secrets, cruelty, and jealousy. That small gesture would awaken a storm, and suddenly everyone's world, including mine, would change forever. Stay with me till the end, because this isn't just a story of kindness. It's a tale of suspense, betrayal, and unexpected power. Subscribe and share if you believe that courage and compassion can shake even the cruelest hearts. I always told myself to stay small, to blend in, to be invisible. It wasn't arrogance or laziness, it was survival. In a place like this, a luxury hotel restaurant where every detail mattered, the slightest mistake could turn polite smiles into cold glares. I moved between tables quietly, balancing plates with careful precision, trying not to draw attention to myself. The chandeliers above sparkled in the soft evening light, reflecting off polished silverware, but none of that beauty made me feel safe. It only reminded me how high the standards were and how far I was from fitting in. The air buzzed with murmurs and clinking glasses, but there was tension lurking beneath the surface. Some guests were impatient, tapping fingers against wine glasses or checking watches, as if time itself owed them an apology. Other staff whispered about what was coming. "The CEO's mother is visiting tonight," someone muttered, shaking their head. I had heard stories. She wasn't just deaf. She was proud, exacting, and the kind of person who could sense fear or hesitation from a mile away. The thought made my stomach twist. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my work. Pour the wine, refill the water, smile politely. But my eyes kept drifting to the entrance. Every so often, I caught the glance of a fellow waiter, their expression taut with nervous anticipation. The managers were bustling around, adjusting place settings, murmuring reminders to each other, and I could feel the tension spreading like static electricity across the room. It wasn't just a family dinner, it felt like a test, a stage where even the smallest error could have consequences. I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't just a girl serving food, I was someone who had worked hard to learn every little skill that might set me apart. Secretly, I had practiced sign language for months. Not that anyone here knew. I didn't need validation or praise. I had learned it for moments like this, moments when empathy could speak louder than words. And tonight, I had a feeling that skill might matter more than anything else I carried. As the clock ticked closer to their arrival, I noticed how every guest suddenly seemed sharper, colder, almost expectant. The family's reputation had reached us in whispers long before they stepped foot in the room. I could feel a subtle divide forming, some staff anxious to impress, others silently fearing their disapproval. And then there was me, wishing I could vanish, but also feeling a strange spark of determination, a quiet voice inside me saying that maybe, just maybe, tonight I could make a difference. Not by being loud, but by being precise, kind, and ready for whatever awaited. I adjusted my apron one last time, smoothing the fabric, and reminded myself, stay calm, stay observant, and don't let fear dictate your actions. I was small, yes, but sometimes the smallest gestures had the power to leave the largest impressions. And somehow, I knew that tonight, my life might pivot on one of those small gestures. The moment I had been both dreading and quietly anticipating finally arrived. The double doors at the entrance swung open, and a hush fell over the room. I felt the shift in the air immediately, like someone had pulled a cord, and tension rippled through every table, every staff member. I didn't look up at first, keeping my hands steady on the tray I was carrying, but then I saw them. He entered first, the billionaire CEO. His presence was sharp, commanding, and impossible to ignore. Every movement was precise, every glance calculated. People straightened instinctively, murmuring as he passed, but I only caught a glimpse of his face. Controlled, almost unreadable. There was a weight to him, an authority that made everyone else seem smaller, less significant. And yet, beneath that exterior, I sensed something untouchable, a side of him that very few had ever reached. Behind him came his mother. I stopped, frozen for a heartbeat, because she moved differently than anyone else in the room. Elegant and graceful, yes, but also careful, measured, as if she were always navigating a world that wasn't built for her. I recognized the slight hesitation in her steps, the subtle way her hands hovered near her sides, almost searching for guidance. I realized immediately, this was the woman I had heard about. The proud, deaf matriarch who demanded respect in every gesture and expected no one to assume they could reach her heart easily. The other staff looked uncertain, exchanging nervous glances. No one knew how to greet her. A waiter murmured under his breath, "Just don't mess this up." I bit my lip and held my tray tighter. My palms were warm, my heart thumping in a rhythm that felt like a drumline in my chest. I could sense the curiosity from the tables around me. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how she would be treated. Something inside me stirred. I knew I had to do more than just smile politely. I remembered my months of practicing, my quiet evenings spent perfecting the gestures that could communicate warmth, respect, and understanding. It wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about connection. And tonight, if I didn't try, I might never get the chance again. I stepped forward, careful and deliberate, my steps measured so as not to jostle the tray. As I approached her, I caught her eyes, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of curiosity, an opening, however small. I swallowed my nerves and prepared to speak in a language far deeper than words. One gesture, one simple sign, and I would either bridge the gap between us or fall silently into the shadows of expectation. Around me, whispers began to rise. Some of the other staff were frozen. Some guests leaned forward, sensing something unusual was about to unfold. But I didn't hear them. I didn't see them. My focus was entirely on her, the woman whose world had been silent and whose presence now demanded every ounce of care I could offer. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a greeting. It was a choice, to stay invisible or to finally step into a moment that could change everything. I took a deep breath, letting the small tremor in my hands settle. Every eye in the room felt like it was burning into me, but I forced myself to focus on her, the mother, poised and graceful, yet so clearly aware of every movement around her. I lifted my hands slowly, careful not to make them jittery, and began to sign, greeting her with the words I had practiced countless times in quiet solitude. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly at first. Then, a flicker of recognition. A small, incredulous smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She repeated my gesture back to me, perfectly mirrored, as if she had been waiting for someone who could speak this language with respect and warmth. The room went still. You could hear the soft clinking of silverware, the distant hum of conversations, all fading into a stunned silence. I wasn't sure I had done it right at first. I had never seen someone react like this. Her smile widened, and a subtle laugh escaped her, almost like a quiet melody in a room full of tension. Then she touched her heart with a gentle sign, one I interpreted immediately: gratitude. I felt my chest tighten. For the first time in this room of polished perfection and hidden judgments, I felt seen. But it wasn't just her reaction that startled everyone. I turned slightly, and my eyes met the CEO's. His lips pressed into a thin line, his usual unreadable expression softening for the briefest moment. Even he seemed caught off guard, impressed in a way he hadn't been with anyone in years. The staff whispered behind me, but I didn't hear them. The family members, however, did. Some of them stiffened instantly. I could feel their tension like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. A cousin, sharp, critical, used to having power over everyone in the room, glared daggers at me. Their envy was palpable. I realized in that moment that this small gesture, this simple act of respect, had shifted the entire balance of the room. I was just a waitress. I had no wealth, no title, no authority. And yet, with nothing more than my hands, my focus, and a little courage, I had drawn the attention of the most powerful people in this space. Some were intrigued, some impressed, and others, especially the cruel relatives, resentful. Her hands continued to move, signing small questions and statements I answered slowly, deliberately, making sure to match her expressions and tone. Each response built a bridge between us, each smile and mirrored gesture drawing her trust closer. The CEO watched quietly, observing the connection forming before him, and the rest of the family, despite themselves, couldn't ignore it. For the first time that evening, I felt a rush of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Pride. Not the pride of being noticed or praised, but the pride of knowing that in this vast, tense room of opulence and expectation, my voice, my silent voice, was powerful enough to reach across worlds. I knew the night was far from over. The family drama, the jealousy, the subtle cruelty, they were still there, lurking in shadows, waiting. But in that instant, I had carved a small space for honesty, for connection, for respect. And it felt unstoppable. I had barely finished responding to her gentle signs when I felt it, a sharp shift in the room. The air seemed to tighten, like someone had twisted it just slightly, enough to make my skin prickle. I glanced toward the family seated at the far end of the table. Their eyes weren't curious or impressed anymore. They were calculating, cold, and unmistakably judgmental. One of the CEO's relatives, a cousin with a reputation for cruelty disguised as charm, leaned forward, a smirk playing on their lips. "Did she just—" "What?" the cousin whispered loudly enough for some nearby guests to catch. There was amusement in their tone, but it was tinged with ridicule. I could feel the judgment pressing down, heavy and suffocating. My stomach twisted, but I refused to let fear take over. I straightened my back, held my hands steady, and reminded myself, this isn't about their opinions. This is about her comfort, her trust, her happiness in this room where she had often been invisible. The cousin's smirk widened. With a subtle gesture, they nudged a server carrying a tray near me, deliberately misdirecting them so that a glass teetered dangerously. "Watch out, sweetheart," they said, their tone mocking like I was about to ruin the evening. A few guests looked over, some amused, others uncertain. I felt my heart hammer, but I didn't flinch. Calmly, I adjusted my hands, signaling silently to the mother, ensuring she wouldn't feel startled or embarrassed. She looked at me, her eyes bright with trust, and I felt a surge of courage. This was more than a simple greeting. It had become a test. I moved with careful precision, steadying the glass before it could fall. The guests gasped slightly, impressed by my composure, while the cousin's smirk faltered just a fraction. I signed gently to the mother, assuring her that everything was fine. She responded with a warm smile, a silent acknowledgement of understanding that made the tension around us shift subtly. It wasn't just the physical act of saving the moment, it was the quiet defiance. I realized then that their cruelty, their need to belittle someone smaller or quieter, was a reflection of themselves, not me. I stayed calm, composed, letting my gestures and expressions convey what words could not: dignity, patience, and care. The CEO's mother leaned slightly forward, signing something that I interpreted instantly: a small, heartfelt thank you. The contrast between her warmth and the cousin's spiteful glares made my heart tighten. I felt a spark of satisfaction, not from triumphing over them, but from maintaining connection, empathy, and respect in a room thick with envy and malice. The whispers spread faster now. Staff exchanged uncertain glances. Guests shifted in their seats, suddenly aware that the shy waitress had done something extraordinary. She had not only connected with the mother, but had also held her ground against subtle attempts at humiliation. I didn't let myself smile just yet. I knew the night wasn't over. The storm of family jealousy and hidden cruelty was still gathering. But for the first time, I realized that even the smallest act of courage could ripple through a room, unsettling the balance of power, and in that moment, I knew. This was no longer just a greeting. This was my statement, and they would remember it. Just when I thought I had settled into a rhythm, the tension in the room shifted again, this time sharper, heavier. It came from the cousin, the one who had tried to embarrass me earlier. Their eyes flicked toward the mother, then toward me, and I caught the subtle curl of malice in their smile. Something was coming. I didn't know what yet, but instinctively, I straightened, ready to respond. The moment arrived suddenly. A delicate plate, already precariously balanced on a tray nearby, slipped. Time seemed to slow as gasps echoed from the tables. The cousin leaned forward, amusement dancing in their eyes, expecting chaos. My stomach knotted, but I moved before panic could take over. I steadied the tray, catching the plate with careful hands. The mother's eyes met mine. Quiet surprise and gratitude flashed across her face. Relief mingled with a thrill I hadn't expected, but the danger wasn't just physical. As the tension hung, hushed whispers spread around the room. One of the other relatives, younger, more impulsive, began to question my role aloud, suggesting that perhaps I wasn't skilled enough to handle such responsibilities. Their voice was sharp, condescending, and it cut through the quiet, creating a ripple of doubt among the staff and some guests. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the mother. She needed reassurance, not excuses. I stepped closer, letting my hands move in slow, precise signs. I explained the small accident without fear, ensuring the mother knew nothing was amiss, that her evening would continue smoothly. Her eyes softened, and she responded with a series of gestures that spoke volumes. Trust, admiration, and subtly a quiet warning to the family members that their cruelty would not succeed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the CEO, who had been watching silently, furrowed his brow in subtle approval. The cousin's smirk faltered. I could feel their irritation growing, but I didn't retreat. Instead, I signed gently, maintaining eye contact with the mother, showing calm and authority without arrogance. The other staff members started to notice, whispering among themselves, surprised by my poise. For a moment, it felt like the air had shifted. The power that the family tried to wield over me was no longer absolute. Then the unexpected twist came. The mother, with a quick and confident gesture, signed something I didn't fully understand at first. But it was enough to stop the cousin in their tracks. A hush fell, and the room seemed to pivot around this small interaction. The CEO leaned forward slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the control I had quietly asserted. I realized then that my role in this room had changed. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I had become a presence that commanded attention, even in a house built on wealth, authority, and hidden cruelty. For the first time, I felt a rush of empowerment. I had navigated subtle sabotage, deflected humiliation, and maintained connection with the person who mattered most in that room. But I knew the night wasn't over. More tests, more tension, and more drama were surely coming, and I would meet them with the same quiet strength, because this was my moment, and I wasn't letting it slip. By now, I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room weighing on me, some filled with curiosity, some with disbelief, and a few with barely disguised envy. The tension had shifted. The once critical relatives now seemed cautious, as if they weren't sure how to respond to the quiet authority I had established with nothing more than my hands and focus. The mother's trust in me radiated like a shield, and for the first time that evening, I felt untouchable in the most subtle way possible. The CEO finally spoke, his voice calm but commanding enough to draw immediate attention. "I see you've handled the evening perfectly," he said, though his gaze didn't waver from me. There was a softness now, a glimmer behind his usual stoicism that I had never seen. It wasn't flattery, it was acknowledgement, respect earned through composure and competence. My chest tightened, a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief washing over me. I kept my focus on the mother, letting her continue signing, answering each gesture with care and patience. With every word exchanged, I felt a stronger connection forming, not just with her, but with the dynamic of the entire room. The guests who had once glanced at me dismissively now leaned forward, fascinated. Even the staff paused in their work, unsure whether to move or merely witness what was unfolding. Then came the subtle but unmistakable reaction of the family. The cousin who had earlier tried to humiliate me shifted in their seat, their smirk replaced by a flicker of unease. Others whispered behind hands, eyes darting between me and the mother. The balance of power had changed. In a single evening, in a room filled with wealth, status, and subtle cruelty, a shy waitress had become the one everyone watched with bated breath. The mother signed something long and heartfelt, her hands moving with fluid precision. I responded, mirroring her gestures, and as our silent conversation continued, a sense of awe settled over the room. The CEO nodded slightly, impressed not only by my skill, but by the confidence and grace I exhibited under pressure. In that moment, I realized that my quiet persistence, my months of practice, and my courage to act had done more than impress one person. They had shifted the perception of everyone present. A soft hum of admiration rippled through the staff, unnoticed by the family but clear to me. I could feel the energy change, the way power and respect were quietly being redistributed. The mother's approval was the crown jewel. It carried weight that money and status could never replicate. The cousins' jealousy was now visible, their attempts to assert dominance nullified by my calm composure. I stood a little taller, though outwardly I remained the same shy waitress. Inside, a spark of confidence ignited. I understood now that influence didn't always come from titles, wealth, or loud voices. Sometimes it came from precision, empathy, and the courage to act correctly when it mattered most. And tonight, in a room full of silent expectations and hidden cruelty, I had earned that influence. The turning point was clear. I was no longer just another server in the room. I had proven that kindness, skill, and quiet confidence could not only survive in this environment, they could command it. And from the corner of my eye, I saw the subtle acknowledgement in the CEO's expression, a promise that this moment was only the beginning. The air in the room had shifted again, heavier this time, charged with tension I could almost taste. The relatives who had tried to undermine me earlier were no longer subtle in their disdain. Their eyes followed my every move, calculating, sharp, and venomous. I could feel their jealousy like a physical weight pressing against my shoulders, and for the first time that evening, I realized that respect alone might not be enough to protect me from the subtle cruelty lurking in the corners of the room. It started with a whisper, a thinly veiled comment about my position, my youth, my lack of pedigree. "Do you think she really belongs here?" one cousin murmured, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. There was laughter, polite on the surface but laced with derision. My hands tightened around the tray I was carrying, and my heart pounded, but I refused to let my fear show. I had learned long ago that composure was a weapon stronger than words. I caught the mother's eye and immediately signed a few reassuring gestures, small but deliberate. She understood instantly, her calm smile a shield against the tension. Her approval grounded me. Even in a room full of judgment, her trust reminded me why I had worked so hard to master this language, this silent form of connection that could speak louder than any insult or sneer. But the relatives weren't finished. One of them, emboldened by the laughter of the others, reached out to disrupt the table, attempting to make a subtle mess. A napkin thrown too close to the mother, a glass nudged in my direction. It was meant to humiliate, to make me flinch. I stepped forward just in time, steadying the items with quiet precision. My movements were deliberate, calm, almost imperceptible, but the effect was immediate. The cousin froze mid-motion, their surprise and frustration clear, while the mother's eyes glimmered with appreciation. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Guests leaned forward, watching the drama unfold, caught between fascination and disbelief. The CEO's expression was unreadable, but I sensed a quiet approval beneath his composed exterior. My pulse raced, not from fear, but from the understanding that I had turned the tension into a moment of respect and control. Then came the mother's gesture, swift and confident. She signed something complex, but the meaning was unmistakable. Warning, acknowledgement, and trust, all wrapped into a single movement. The family's cruelty faltered under her quiet authority. Whispers of envy turned into awkward silence, and the power in the room subtly shifted. Even the most critical relatives realized that I was no longer a mere observer. They could not ignore me, nor diminish the quiet influence I had earned. In that instant, I felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't just about serving food or following protocol. This was about dignity, courage, and connection. I understood now that subtlety and empathy could outmatch wealth, status, and malice. And as I stood there, the room watching, I knew that my presence, my skill, and my heart had irrevocably changed the balance of power. For the first time that evening, I smiled, not shyly, not nervously, but with quiet pride. The storm of cruelty had been met with calm strength, and the room, no matter how wealthy or critical, had to recognize it. Tonight I had not only earned respect, I had earned a place that no envy or malice could take away. As the evening drew to a close, a quiet calm settled over the room. The laughter of the cruel relatives had faded into uneasy murmurs, and the guests who had once cast doubtful glances now looked on with curiosity and respect. I carried my tray with the same careful precision as before, but this time there was a subtle difference in the way I moved. I felt lighter, more certain, as though the weight of expectation and fear had finally lifted from my shoulders. The mother caught my eye across the table. Her smile was warm, genuine, and full of gratitude. She signed a few simple words, slow and deliberate, and I felt them resonate in my chest. Trust, admiration, thank you. In that moment, I realized that the hours of preparation, the quiet practice, and the courage it took to step forward had all been worth it. I hadn't just impressed her. I had connected with her in a way that transcended language, status, or judgment. The CEO approached me quietly, his expression softened from the usual distant authority I had come to expect. "You handled everything perfectly," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. It wasn't praise for appearance or protocol, it was recognition of skill, patience, and character. I nodded, barely able to contain the flutter of pride in my chest. I had always been small, overlooked, just another server in a world of opulence, but tonight I had mattered in a way that no wealth, title, or privilege could ever guarantee. As I set the final tray down, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the night. The cruelty, the jealousy, the whispered judgments, they had not broken me. Each subtle act of malice, each attempt to undermine my confidence, had been met with calm, dignity, and careful thought. And in return, I had gained something far greater than approval from strangers. I had earned respect, trust, and a sense of power I had never known I possessed. I glanced around the room one last time. The once critical relatives were silent, their expressions a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration. The staff, who had watched me nervously throughout the evening, now looked at me differently. There was acknowledgement in their eyes, a quiet understanding that courage and skill can transform even the most hostile environments. And the mother? Her gaze lingered, filled with a warmth and appreciation that I knew I would carry with me long after the evening ended. As I walked toward the exit, the subtle applause of recognition from a few guests followed me. I didn't stop to respond. I didn't need to. The moment wasn't about acknowledgement, it was about understanding my own worth, the quiet strength I had carried all along, and the realization that even the smallest gestures, performed with sincerity and courage, can ripple across a room and change everything. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be seen, not just noticed, but truly recognized. And as I stepped out into the soft night air, I smiled, knowing that my life had shifted in ways I hadn't even dared to imagine. I had come in shy, nervous, and invisible. I left empowered, respected, and undeniably present. If this story reminded you that courage, kindness, and quiet strength can overcome even cruelty and envy, hit the like button, share with someone who needs inspiration, and subscribe for more stories where ordinary people create extraordinary moments.